The first delivery truck arrived at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, its rumbling engine shattering the morning silence of Willowbrook Estates like a thunderclap. Marcus watched from his bedroom window as the massive vehicle backed into his driveway, its beeping alarm echoing off the pristine facades of his neighbors' homes. Lights flickered on in windows up and down the street. Perfect timing, Marcus muttered, pulling on his work clothes. He deliberately scheduled the delivery for the earliest legal hour, knowing that Karen Martinez was typically up by 6:45 for her morning constitutional, a 20-minute walk during which she inspected every lawn, mailbox, and front porch for violations. The truck driver, a weathered man named Pete who'd been making deliveries in suburban neighborhoods for 15 years, raised an eyebrow as he surveyed the mountain of lumber, PVC pipes, and sporting equipment being unloaded onto Marcus's driveway. Building a playground? Pete asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Something like that, Marcus replied, signing the delivery receipt. For my dog. Pete glanced at Apollo, who was watching the proceedings with intense interest from the front window. Hell of a lucky dog. As the truck pulled away, Marcus noticed curtains twitching in windows across the street. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor Karen had mentioned, stood openly on her front porch, her morning coffee forgotten in her hands as she stared at the supplies now covering Marcus's driveway. Good morning, Mrs. Patterson, Marcus called out, waving cheerfully. She lifted her coffee cup in a tentative greeting, her expression more curious than hostile. This surprised Marcus. Based on Karen's complaints, he'd expected the entire neighborhood to be united against him. By 7 a.m., Marcus had set up his workstation in the backyard, spreading blueprints across a folding table and organizing his tools with the precision of a military operation. He'd spent the previous 3 weeks researching professional dog agility courses, studying engineering principles, and consulting with a contractor friend about structural integrity. What he was about to build wasn't just a playground, it was a masterpiece. Apollo bounded over, tail wagging furiously as he investigated the new additions to his domain. Marcus knelt down and scratched behind the dog's ears. This is for you, boy. Every jump, every tunnel, every obstacle, it's all designed to let you be exactly who you are. The sound of heels clicking on pavement announced Karen's arrival before Marcus saw her. She appeared at his back gate at exactly 7:15 a.m., her silver hair already perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her expression was a mixture of outrage and disbelief. What, she said, her voice carrying across the yard like a winter wind. Is all this? Marcus looked up from his blueprints, feigning surprise. Oh, good morning, Karen. I'm building an exercise facility for Apollo. An exercise facility? Her voice rose an octave. In your backyard? That's right. Marcus stood, brushing dirt from his knees. I read through the HOA covenant very carefully. Section 12.3 specifically allows for reasonable accommodations for pet exercise within property boundaries. Karen's eyes narrowed. That section refers to dog runs. Maybe a small fenced area. Actually, Marcus said, producing a highlighted copy of the covenant. It doesn't specify size or scope. It just says reasonable accommodations. I had a lawyer review it yesterday. As long as I don't exceed property lines or create structures over 12 feet in height without permits, I'm well within my rights. The color drained from Karen's face. You had a lawyer review it? I did. Jennifer Walsh, actually. She specializes in HOA disputes. Marcus had indeed consulted with Jennifer, the attorney who'd handled his divorce. She'd been delighted to help him find loopholes in the covenant that Karen had probably written herself. This is ridiculous, Karen sputtered. You can't just build whatever you want. Watch me, Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried a steel that made Karen take an involuntary step backward. She spun on her heel and stalked away, already pulling out her phone. Marcus could hear her voice growing increasingly agitated as she made calls, first to Gerald, then to Patricia, then to someone she addressed as City Hall. By 10 a.m., Marcus had assembled the frame for the first obstacle, a series of jumps that would allow Apollo to bound through the air with the grace of a gazelle. The design was elegant in its simplicity, adjustable heights, weather-resistant materials, and a modular system that could be reconfigured for different training exercises. Excuse me. Marcus turned to find a woman in her 30s standing at his gate. She had paint-stained fingers and wore a smile that immediately put him at ease. I'm Jessica Chen, no relation, despite the name, she said with a laugh. I live 3 houses down. I just wanted to say that what you're doing is amazing. Thank you, Marcus replied, surprised by the support. I wasn't sure how the neighbors would react. Are you kidding? My kids are fascinated. They've been watching from their bedroom window all morning. She gestured toward a house down the street where 2 young faces were indeed pressed against an upstairs window. They are asking if they can help. I wouldn't want to impose, it's no imposition. My husband Tom is actually a contractor. He's working a job across town this week, but he mentioned he'd be happy to lend a hand on weekends if you need it. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. That would be incredible. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you meet my kids. They are going to want to test every obstacle themselves before Apollo gets a chance. As Jessica walked away, Marcus noticed more neighbors emerging from their homes. Not with the hostile curiosity he'd expected, but with genuine interest. An elderly man from 2 houses over wandered by with his own dog, a small terrier, who immediately began investigating the construction materials with professional interest. Building something impressive, the man said, introducing himself as Robert Kim. Haven't seen this much activity in the neighborhood since the Hendersons put in their pool. Just trying to keep my dog entertained, Marcus replied. Smart approach. My Pepper here could use more exercise too. Mind if I watch your work? Might pick up some ideas. By noon, Marcus had an audience. Word had spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire, and nearly a dozen people had found reasons to walk past his house. Most were genuinely curious, asking questions about the design and offering encouragement. A few seemed skeptical but not hostile. The only person notably absent was Karen Martinez, though Marcus could see her silhouette in her front window, watching his every move. The first obstacle was completed by 2 p.m. Marcus had designed it as a series of 3 jumps, each adjustable from 6 inches to 3 feet in height. The construction was solid, built to withstand both Apollo's enthusiasm and the elements. As he stood back to admire his work, Apollo approached cautiously, sniffing at the new structure with the careful attention of a professional quality inspector. Go ahead, boy, Marcus encouraged. Give it a try. Apollo needed no further invitation. He approached the first jump, measured the distance with his eyes, and sailed over it with effortless grace. The small crowd that had gathered applauded, and Apollo, recognizing approval, immediately circled back to jump again. He's a natural, Robert Kim observed, his own dog watching with rapt attention. He's been ready for this his whole life, Marcus replied, watching Apollo clear all 3 jumps in sequence. He just needed the opportunity. By 4 p.m., the obstacle course had its first visitor. A city inspector named Craig Morrison arrived with a clipboard and a tape measure, his expression professionally neutral. Got a call about unpermitted construction, he said, though his tone suggested he considered it a waste of time. Everything's permitted, Marcus replied, handing over a folder of documents. Structural plans, engineering specs, and municipal permits. All filed properly. Craig flipped through the paperwork, his eyebrows rising slightly. This is pretty thorough. Most people building a deck don't go to this much trouble. I wanted to make sure everything was done right. Mind if I take a look at the construction? Marcus led him into the backyard, where Apollo was still happily practicing his jumps. Craig examined the obstacles with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every possible code violation. Solid work, he admitted. Whoever drew these plans knew what they were doing. My brother's an architect, Marcus explained. He helped with the design. Craig made notes on his clipboard, measured a few key dimensions, and tested the stability of the structures. After 15 minutes, he signed off on the inspection report. Everything looks good, he said. Though I have to ask, how many obstacles are you planning to build? Marcus smiled, pulling out his master blueprint. 17. Craig's eyes widened as he studied the design. You're building a professional-grade agility course. Apollo deserves the best. I'd say he's getting it. Craig glanced around the yard, already visualizing the completed course. This is going to be something else. As Craig packed up his equipment, Marcus noticed Karen Martinez approaching from across the street, her stride purposeful and her expression thunderous. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I trust you are here to shut down this spectacle." Craig looked up from his clipboard, his expression carefully neutral. "Actually, Mrs. Martinez, I'm here to APRA." The camera pans across a pristine suburban neighborhood where silence is law and conformity is king. But in one backyard, something extraordinary is about to unfold. Karen Martinez thought she could destroy a man's bond with his beloved dog with a single complaint to the HOA. She had no idea that her petty act of neighborhood tyranny would unleash a chain of events that would transform not just a backyard, but an entire community. What started as one woman's crusade against a too-hyper golden retriever would become the most spectacular act of defiance Willowbrook Estates had ever seen. And when the dust settled, Karen would discover that sometimes the very thing you try the morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Willowbrook Estates, each blade of grass seemingly cut to regulation height. Marcus Chen stood at his kitchen window, watching his 3-year-old golden retriever, Apollo, bound across their modest backyard with the unbridled joy that only dogs possess. The retriever's golden coat caught the light as he chased a tennis ball, his tail a blur of happiness. "Easy, boy," Marcus called out, though he couldn't help but smile. Apollo had been his constant companion since the divorce, the one bright spot in an otherwise dark chapter of his life. When Sarah had taken everything else, the house, most of their friends, even his confidence, Apollo had remained, offering unconditional love and a reason to get up each morning. The knock on his front door came at exactly 8:47 a.m. Marcus knew the time because he'd been timing Apollo's morning routine, trying to establish a pattern that might help with the dog's abundant energy. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with Karen Martinez, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her lips were pressed into a thin line that had become her signature expression. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been told no by a homeowners association. "We need to talk." Behind her stood 2 other members of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board, Gerald Simpson, a retired insurance adjuster whose hobby was measuring lawn heights with a ruler, and Patricia Webb, whose previous career as a middle school principal had left her with an uncanny ability to make grown adults feel like misbehaving children. "Good morning, Karen," Marcus replied, stepping aside to let them in. "What can I do for you?" Karen's eyes swept across his living room, taking inventory of the dog toys scattered on the floor, the water bowl by the kitchen door, and the faint smell of pet shampoo that lingered in the air. "Your dog," she said without preamble, "is disturbing the peace." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Apollo? How so?" "The barking," Patricia Webb interjected, consulting a small notebook. "Mrs. Martinez has documented 17 separate incidents this week alone." 17. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "I mean, he barks sometimes when he's playing, but, and the running," Gerald added, his tone suggesting that physical activity was somehow offensive. "The constant running back and forth in your yard. It's excessive." Karen stepped forward, her presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "Mr. Chen, I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. We have standards here. Expectations. Your dog's hyperactive behavior is not only disruptive, it's setting a precedent that could attract other, problematic pet owners." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced during his divorce proceedings when lawyers had dissected his life with clinical precision. "He's just energetic. Golden retrievers are active dogs. I exercise him regularly." "Not regularly enough, apparently," Karen interrupted. "Which brings me to the main point of our visit." She reached into her purse and produced a manila envelope. "This is a formal complaint being filed with the HOA board. Your dog's behavior constitutes a nuisance under Section 4.7 of our community guidelines." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the envelope. The official letterhead of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association seemed to mock him from the paper. What does this mean? It means, Karen said, her voice taking on a tone that suggested she was savoring every word, that you have 30 days to resolve this issue. Either you find a way to control your dog's hyperactivity, or will be forced to take further action. Further action? Gerald cleared his throat. Removal of the pet from the premises. It's all outlined in the covenant you signed when you purchased your home. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Apollo, sensing something was wrong, had wandered in from the backyard and now sat beside his owner, looking up with concerned golden eyes. Marcus reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. You can't be serious, Marcus said. He's not hurting anyone. He's just a happy. Happiness, Karen replied coldly, is not an excuse for disturbing the peace. Mrs. Patterson next door is 78 years old. She needs her quiet. The Johnsons have a newborn baby. Your dog's constant activity is affecting property values. Patricia Webb nodded in agreement. We've had similar situations before, Mr. Chen. Usually, people do the responsible thing and rehome the animal before it becomes a larger issue. Rehome? Marcus's voice rose an octave. You want me to give up my dog? We want you to be considerate of your neighbors, Karen said, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of satisfaction, that made Marcus realize this wasn't really about noise complaints or property values. This was about power. About Karen Martinez reminding everyone in Willowbrook Estates exactly who was in charge. I'll think about it, Marcus managed to say. You'll do more than think about it, Karen replied, moving toward the door. You'll fix it. Because if you don't, we will. After they left, Marcus sat on his couch with Apollo's head in his lap, staring at the formal complaint. The language was dry and bureaucratic, but the threat was clear. He had 30 days to make Apollo less joyful, less energetic, less alive. That evening, Marcus called his younger brother David, who lived 2 states away. They want me to get rid of Apollo, Marcus said without preamble when David answered. What? Why? Marcus explained the situation, his voice growing more frustrated with each detail. I don't know what to do, Dave. After everything with Sarah, Apollo is all I have left. But if I don't comply with the HOA. Screw the HOA, David said immediately. You bought that house. You pay your mortgage. You should be able to have a dog. It's not that simple. The covenant I signed, did you read the whole thing? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Not thoroughly. It was like 100 pages. Then maybe you should start there. Fight this thing, Marcus. Don't let some power-hungry neighbor dictate your life. After hanging up, Marcus spent the next 3 hours reading every word of the Willowbrook Estates covenant. Most of it was standard language about lawn care and architectural modifications, but buried in section 12.3, he found something interesting. A clause about reasonable accommodations for pet exercise within property boundaries. The next morning, Marcus was in his backyard at dawn, measuring. Apollo watched with curious eyes as his owner paced back and forth, notebook in hand, calculating dimensions and angles. The yard was larger than Marcus had initially thought, nearly a quarter acre, with solid privacy fencing on 3 sides. You know what, boy? Marcus said, kneeling down to meet Apollo's eager gaze. Karen wants you to be less hyper. Fine. But she never said anything about channeling that energy. Apollo tilted his head, tail wagging. How would you like the greatest playground any dog has ever seen? For the first time in weeks, Marcus smiled. A real smile. He pulled out his phone and started making calls to lumber yards, to sporting goods stores, to the contractor who had built his deck. By noon, he had a plan. By evening, he had permits. By the end of the week, he had a mission. Karen Martinez had picked the wrong dog owner to mess with. As Marcus sketched out his designs that night, Apollo sleeping peacefully at his feet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was beginning. This wasn't just about saving his dog anymore. This was about standing up to every Karen Martinez in the world who thought they could control other people's happiness. He had no idea that his act of defiance would soon become the talk of not just Willowbrook Estates, but the entire city. And he certainly couldn't have predicted that Karen's complaint would be the spark that ignited a movement that would change everything. The war for Apollo's right to be happy was about to begin. The anonymous tip came in at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday, 17 days after construction had begun. Marcus was jolted awake by the sound of Apollo's urgent barking, not the playful yips he made during the day, but the deep, protective growls that meant danger. Through his bedroom window, Marcus saw them, 3 animal control officers moving through his backyard with flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows, stood Karen Martinez, her arms crossed and her face a mask of grim satisfaction. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered, pulling on clothes as quickly as possible. By the time he reached his back door, the officers were already examining the obstacle course with professional interest. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes, looked up as Marcus approached. "Mr. Chen." "Officer Rodriguez, Animal Control. We received a complaint about unsafe conditions for your dog." "Unsafe conditions?" Marcus's voice cracked with disbelief. "What kind of unsafe conditions?" Rodriguez gestured toward the obstacles, which had grown into an impressive array over the past 2 weeks. In addition to the original jumps, Marcus had completed a tunnel system, a series of weave poles, and an A-frame ramp that Apollo had already mastered with enthusiasm. "The complaint alleges that you're forcing your dog to perform dangerous stunts," Rodriguez explained, her tone suggesting she found the allegation as dubious as Marcus did. "We are required to investigate all reports of potential animal abuse." "Animal abuse?" Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical blow. "I built this to make him happy. Look at him, does he look abused?" Apollo, apparently deciding that 3 a.m. visitors were an exciting new development, had grabbed his favorite tennis ball and was now demonstrating his jumping skills for the officers, his tail wagging furiously. Officer Rodriguez watched Apollo's performance with growing amusement. "Sir, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know what an abused animal looks like." She gestured toward Apollo, who was now attempting to get one of the junior officers to throw his ball. "This isn't it." "Then we are done here?" Marcus asked hopefully. "Not quite. We still need to document the complaint and file a report." Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and began typing. "Mind if I ask about the construction? This is pretty elaborate for a backyard setup." As Marcus explained the HOA situation and his legal battle with Karen, Rodriguez's expression grew increasingly interested. By the time he finished, she was openly smiling. "So this is the famous dog obstacle course," she said. "We've been getting calls about it all week." "You have?" "Oh yes. Mostly from people wanting to know if what you're doing is legal. Some asking if they can build their own." She gestured toward the course. "You've started something of a trend." One of the junior officers, a young man named Peterson, looked up from where he'd been examining the tunnel system. "This is incredible work. My girlfriend's been trying to get me to build something like this for our German Shepherd." "The engineering is solid," the third officer added. "Better than some of the commercial dog parks I've seen." Rodriguez finished her report and handed Marcus a copy. "Mr. Chen, I'm required to tell you that we found no evidence of animal abuse, neglect, or unsafe conditions. Your dog appears to be healthy, happy, and well cared for." "Thank you," Marcus said, relief flooding through him. "However," Rodriguez continued, her voice dropping to a more serious tone, "I should warn you that this probably won't be the last complaint. Whoever filed this one is clearly determined to cause problems." As the officers packed up their equipment, Marcus noticed Karen stepping out of the shadows, her face a mask of fury. She'd obviously expected a very different outcome. "This is ridiculous," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "That animal is a menace to this neighborhood." Officer Rodriguez turned toward Karen, her expression cooling noticeably. "Are you the complainant?" "I am a concerned neighbor," Karen replied, lifting her chin defiantly. That dog's excessive activity is disturbing the peace, and now this man has built some kind of a circus in his backyard. I see. Rodriguez made a note on her tablet. And you've observed actual abuse of the animal? Oh. Karen faltered for a moment. The dog is clearly being overworked. The dog is playing, Peterson interjected, watching Apollo chase his ball in circles. This is what healthy dogs do. Furthermore, Rodriguez added, her voice taking on an official tone, filing false reports of animal abuse is a misdemeanor offense. I trust that any future complaints will be based on actual evidence rather than personal grievances. Karen's face went white. Without another word, she turned and stalked back toward her house, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. After the officers left, Marcus sat in his backyard with Apollo, watching the sun rise over the obstacle course. The dog was exhausted from his midnight adventure and had curled up beside his owner, his head resting on Marcus's knee. She's not going to stop, Marcus said quietly, scratching behind Apollo's ears. She's going to keep escalating until she gets what she wants. But as Marcus surveyed his backyard kingdom, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: pride. Not just in the construction, but in what it represented. Every obstacle, every carefully planned angle and measurement was an act of defiance against people who wanted to control how others lived their lives. By 7 a.m., word of the animal control visit had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Marcus's phone buzzed with texts from neighbors he'd barely spoken to before, all offering support and expressing outrage at Karen's tactics. Jessica Chen was the first to arrive at his door, carrying a thermos of coffee and a plate of homemade muffins. I can't believe she called animal control, Jessica said, shaking her head. That's just vindictive. I'm starting to think vindictive is her natural state, Marcus replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The whole neighborhood's talking about it. People are angry, Marcus. Really angry. As if to prove her point, Robert Kim appeared at the gate with his terrier, Pepper, followed by the Hendersons from across the street, and then the Patels from 2 houses down. Within an hour, Marcus's backyard was full of neighbors, all wanting to see the course that had caused such controversy. This is amazing, said Tom Chen, Jessica's husband, who had arrived fresh from his construction job. The engineering alone. You could charge admission for this. Don't give him ideas, Jessica laughed. Karen would have a heart attack. But it was Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor Karen had claimed was being disturbed by Apollo's barking, who provided the morning's biggest surprise. I've been watching that sweet boy every day, she said, her weathered hands gentle as she petted Apollo. He's never been anything but well-behaved. As for the barking Karen keeps complaining about, I think she's confusing him with the Jamisons. Chihuahua 3 blocks over. You mean Apollo hasn't been disturbing you? Marcus asked. Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely puzzled. Disturbing me? Dear, watching him play in your yard is the highlight of my day. He's brought more joy to this neighborhood than we've seen in years. The crowd murmured in agreement, and Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun, but the peace was short-lived. At exactly 10 a.m., a van pulled up outside Marcus's house. The logo on the side read Channel 7 News, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. Oh no, Jessica whispered. She didn't. But she had. Karen Martinez emerged from the news van like a general leading a charge, followed by a reporter with perfectly coiffed hair and a cameraman with a shoulder-mounted camera. Mr. Chen, the reporter called out, her voice carrying the theatrical quality of someone accustomed to being on television. I'm Sarah Mitchell from Channel 7. We understand you've been building an illegal structure in your backyard. It's not illegal, Marcus replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Everything's been properly permitted. But neighbors are concerned about the noise and disruption, Sarah continued, clearly reading from notes that Karen had provided. Some are calling it a nuisance. Marcus looked around at the crowd of neighbors still gathered in his backyard, all of whom were now watching the news crew with expressions ranging from amusement to outright hostility. Which neighbors? Tom Chen called out. Because we're all here, and we think it's fantastic. Sarah Mitchell's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. This clearly wasn't the story she'd been told to expect. The structure certainly is extensive, she said, gesturing toward the obstacle course. Some might say excessive for a residential area. Some might say a lot of things, Mrs. Patterson interjected, her voice carrying the authority of her 8 decades. But those of us who actually live here think Marcus has done something wonderful. The cameraman, apparently recognizing good television when he saw it, began filming the crowd of supportive neighbors. Karen, realizing that her carefully orchestrated media ambush was backfiring spectacularly, tried to insert herself into the shot. The real issue, she said, her voice rising to be heard over the crowd, is that this sets a precedent. If everyone starts building elaborate structures in their yards, then maybe we'd have a more interesting neighborhood, Robert Kim interrupted. Earning a round of applause from the crowd, Sarah Mitchell, clearly recognizing that the story was slipping away from her, tried to regain control. Mr. Chen, how do you? Sergeant Williams led Marcus to the front of his house, away from the crowd and cameras, his expression carefully neutral. Apollo trotted alongside them, his tail wagging despite the tension crackling in the air. Mr. Chen, I need you to walk me through exactly what you've built here, Williams said, pulling out a notepad. And I need the truth about any commercial activity. There is no commercial activity, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. I built an agility course for my dog. Everything's been properly permitted through the city. The complainant says you've been charging neighbors for training sessions. Marcus felt his temper flare. That's completely false. I've never charged anyone for anything. Some neighbors have watched Apollo use the course, but that's it. Williams made notes, his expression giving nothing away. Any plans to offer training services in the future? None whatsoever. This is for Apollo, period. From the backyard, Marcus could hear the murmur of voices as the news crew interviewed his neighbors. Sarah Mitchell's voice carried clearly. So you're saying the dog has never been a problem? Never, came Mrs. Patterson's firm reply. That boy is a sweetheart. The real problem is Karen Martinez harassing this poor man. Sergeant Williams glanced toward the backyard, where the impromptu neighborhood rally was still in full swing. Seems like you've got support. I never expected it, Marcus admitted. I thought I was fighting this alone. Mind if I take a look at the course? They walked back toward the crowd, which parted respectfully as the sergeant approached. Williams examined the obstacles with the same professional attention the animal control officers had shown, testing stability and measuring heights. Professional quality construction, he observed. Your brother the architect do the design. You know about that? Williams smiled slightly. Small neighborhood. Word gets around. He finished his inspection and closed his notepad. Mr. Chen, I don't see any evidence of commercial activity. What I see is a well-built recreational facility on private property, properly permitted and clearly loved by one very happy dog. Relief flooded through Marcus, but Williams wasn't finished. However, the sergeant continued, his voice carrying across the yard so everyone could hear, I am concerned about the filing of false police reports. The crowd fell silent. Even the news crew stopped filming to listen. Filing a false report is a serious offense, Williams said, his gaze finding Karen in the crowd. It wastes police resources and can result in charges against the complainant. Karen's face went white. Oh. I had every reason to believe this is the third call we've received about this address in 2 weeks. Animal control was here yesterday, code enforcement last week, and now us. Either Mr. Chen is running the most incompetently illegal operation in the city, or someone is making a pattern of false complaints. The cameraman, recognizing a pivotal moment, swung his lens toward Karen. She stepped backward, her composure finally cracking completely. He's violating the spirit of our neighborhood covenants, she said, her voice rising with desperation. The noise, the disruption, what noise? Mrs. Patterson interjected. The only noise I hear is you complaining. The dog barks constantly. No, he doesn't, said Robert Kim. I live right next door. Apollo barely makes a sound. The construction noise was during legal hours and lasted less than 3 weeks, Tom Chen added. I've worked construction jobs that were 10 times more disruptive. Williams watched this exchange with growing interest. Are you the HOA representative who's been filing these complaints? Karen straightened, trying to regain her authoritative bearing. I am acting in the best interests of Willowbrook Estates. Acting in whose best interests? Jessica Chen called out. Because it's certainly not ours. Sarah Mitchell, realizing that the story had taken an unexpected turn, stepped forward with a microphone. Mrs. Martinez, can you explain why you've been so determined to shut down what appears to be a harmless dog playground? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karen looked around at the faces surrounding her, neighbors she'd tried to rally to her cause, police officers who'd found no wrongdoing, news cameras broadcasting her vendetta to the entire city. For the first time since this began, she was completely alone. Oh. She started, then stopped. The mask of neighborly concern she'd worn for weeks finally slipped away, revealing the petty tyranny beneath. He thinks he can just do whatever he wants. Move into our neighborhood and change everything. We have standards here. What standards? Mrs. Patterson asked, her elderly voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The standard of making people miserable. Because that seems to be your specialty. I've lived here 15 years. And in 15 years, what have you done to make this neighborhood better? Tom Chen interrupted. Marcus has been here 6 months and has already brought us together more than you ever have. The crowd murmured agreement, and Marcus realized something profound was happening. This wasn't just about Apollo anymore, or even about the obstacle course. This was about a community finding its voice against a bully who'd controlled them through fear for years. Sarah Mitchell, sensing the dramatic moment, pressed forward. Mrs. Martinez, some of your neighbors are suggesting that your complaints are motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate concerns. How do you respond? Karen's carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely. You want to know how I respond? She shouted, her voice shrill with rage. I respond by saying that I will not be intimidated by some divorced loser and his overgrown mutt. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the news crew seemed stunned by the viciousness of the attack. Apollo, sensing the hostility directed at his owner, moved closer to Marcus and sat protectively beside him. Sergeant Williams stepped forward, his expression hard. I think you need to calm down. But Karen was beyond calming down. Weeks of frustrated plans and failed schemes had pushed her past the breaking point. You think you've won, she snarled at Marcus. You think building your little playground makes you some kind of hero. You're nothing. A failure at marriage. A failure at life, and when I'm done with you, you'll be a failure here too. The crowd recoiled from the naked hatred in her voice. Mrs. Patterson actually gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Karen, that's enough, Robert Kim said, his voice shocked. But she wasn't listening. I will make your life miserable, she continued, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. I will file complaints every day. I will make phone calls to every city department. I will turn this neighborhood against you if it's the last thing I do. Sergeant Williams said firmly, you need to stop talking right now. Sarah Mitchell looked directly into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing an extraordinary confrontation in the Willowbrook Estates neighborhood, where what started as a dispute over a dog playground has revealed deeper tensions about community, tolerance, and the abuse of power. The cameraman panned across the crowd of neighbors, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and disgust at Karen's outburst. Then the lens found Apollo, sitting calmly beside his owner, his golden coat gleaming in the morning sun, completely oblivious to the hatred directed at him. This is what she's been fighting, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. A dog who wants to play. A man who wanted to make his pet happy. This is what threatened her so much. That she was willing to destroy a neighbor's life. He knelt beside Apollo, scratching behind the dog's ears with gentle familiarity. Look at him. Look at this terrible menace to neighborhood standards. Apollo, responding to the attention, rolled over and presented his belly for scratching, his tail wagging furiously. A few people in the crowd actually laughed despite the tension. Sergeant Williams closed his notepad with finality. Mr. Chen, you are free to continue enjoying your property as you see fit. Mrs. Martinez, you and I need to have a conversation about appropriate use of emergency services. As Williams led Karen aside, her protests growing increasingly shrill. Sarah Mitchell approached Marcus for a final interview. Mr. Chen, how does it feel to know that your fight for your dog's happiness has become a symbol for standing up to neighborhood bullies? Marcus looked around at the faces of his neighbors, people who had started as strangers but had become allies in the fight against petty tyranny. I never wanted to be a symbol of anything. I just wanted Apollo to be happy. But if our story helps other people stand up to bullies like Karen Martinez, then maybe something good came out of all this. And what's next for you and Apollo? Marcus smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile he'd worn in weeks. We are going to finish the obstacle course. Apollo still has 13 more obstacles to master. As the news crew packed up their equipment and the crowd began to disperse, neighbors lingered to offer final words of support. Mrs. Patterson pressed a plate of homemade cookies into Marcus's hands. Tom Chen promised to help with the remaining construction. Jessica's children, who had been watching from their bedroom window all morning, finally got permission to come down and meet Apollo. But it was Robert Kim who delivered the most significant news. Marcus, he said, his voice barely containing excitement, I just got off the phone with my buddy who works at the parks department.